So my nose, I want it to be with antibacterial, so that's why that's on the over the nose. In other news, I finished my book today by Joan Johnston, Surrender. And let me tell you something, it's probably going to be the longest book review I've ever done. So this might be a part 4 book review. Just saying. I have started reading my second book, which I got this one at Walgreens. It's Debbie I probably am not going to say her name right. Maycomer, Denim and Diamonds, and it's an amazing story. I'm on page 40 already. But back to this one. I don't want to cheat you out of a great book review here. You want to read this book. You want to check it out. Now, this is the book that I had started reading, and I stopped, and then one night I was in the drive-thru at Arby's with Grandpa, and we were sitting there talking, and he goes, tell me about the book you're reading. I said, well, I started reading it. There's a few good pages in it, but I don't know if it's really believable. And he goes, read the book. I suggest you read the book. Finish it. Give it a chance. I'm glad he said finish it, because by the time I got done with it, there's a lot of good moments in here I'm going to share with you. And New York Times bestselling author Joan Johnston's scorching contemporary romance, A Second Chance at Love May Be the Last, when a sudden tornado of flame from a raging forest fire snuffs out both engines of the Twin Otter being piloted by Taylor Greyhawk, she locks eyes with the last man on the plane, her longtime enemy and one-time lover, smoke jumper Brian Flynn. Greyhawk and Flynn can't agree on anything, not even how to escape their desperate situation. Once they're on the ground, the only shelter they can find leaves the adversaries trapped together with no way out. Injured and starving, Taylor and Brian struggle to survive, yet somehow the threat of imminent death resonates something deep and powerful between them. Feelings they thought were long dead rise from the ashes, suddenly making them more than just allies in a life-or-death struggle against nature's fury. A still greater challenge awaits when their fate delivers them from a harm and puts their rekindled love to the ultimate test: surrender to each other, or part forever. Okay, so now that you got the gist of what it's going to be about, which there's 2 other books in this series, which is the King's Brat series, and I'm definitely going to put them down for reads, so it's just that good. It says this book is dedicated to wildland firefighters who have lost their lives in the line of duty. So let's search for that first paperclip. Okay, there it is, page 3. Brian met her gaze with worried eyes. This plane's headed straight into the fire, he said from the open doorway. We need to jump now while there's still time to hit a safe clearing. Get over here, Tag. He named her Tag because of her name being Taylor. Let me get over here. Taylor Ann Greyhawk, I want to say it is. Anyway, that's the nickname he gave her. The use of her nickname, which came from initials Taylor Ann Greyhawk, conjured up powerful, painful memories. Brian had dubbed her with that when he was a junior and she was a freshman at Jackson High. Taylor felt her stomach shift when the plane jolted as the right wingtip was abruptly shoved upward by a scorching gust of air. Time was running out, her eyes were tearing from the smoke, and her chin was trembling despite the clenched teeth. In a voice that was, page 4, hoarse, but surprisingly composed, considering the desperation she felt inside, Taylor reported their position on radio, along with the information she gleaned from their survey of fire and the fact that she'd been unable to restart the engines. I'm putting us down in the first clearing I find, she told the dispatcher. Roger, the dispatcher replied. Good luck. As Taylor surveyed the violent landscape, she figured it was going to take more than luck to survive. It was going to take a miracle. She didn't see an area large enough allowing her land without going in nose first. If the crash didn't kill them, they would burn to death in a converging fire. She knew her thoughts should be focused on wind currents and lift and drag. What consumed her instead was the greatest regret. What would my life be like now if I hadn't broken up with Brian Flynn in high school? Taylor had memories of few autumn months that she'd secretly dated Brian that were hard to forget. Laughter, loving, sharing, and bonding. He'd almost seemed as perceptive of her feelings as her fraternal twin, which was saying something because her life and Vic's had been wrapped around one around the other like a clinging vine. Vic's is for Victoria, so you know. It was easy to blame the tension between their feuding families for driving them apart. Vic had been appalled when she discovered Taylor was dating one of those quote-unquote awful Flynn boys, and demanded that she stop seeing Brian, but ultimately the decision had been hers. Page 5. She was the one who'd given up on the possibility of loving and being loved. She was the one who had walked away. After college, Brian had become a firefighter and married someone else. She'd become a corporate jet pilot who flew CEOs to meetings around the country and found time during the summer to drop smoke jumpers from a twin-engine Otter. She'd been engaged 3 times, but she'd never been married. Since Brian's divorce a year ago, they both were single. During that year, she'd done nothing to engage his interest, nothing to ignite that secret of romance of a lifetime that had been snuffed out 13 years ago like a campfire when you were done with it. She often thought about approaching Brian once she learned that he was free, but she waited too long. Very likely they were going to die in the next few minutes. But if we live through this... Tag. She focused her gaze on the tall, broad-shouldered man who'd been forbidden fruit when she was a teenager. "I'm not leaving without you," Brian said from the doorway. "Get your beautiful butt over here." I'm being nice. I'm not reading the exact word. When their eyes met, she felt the past flooding back, all the things she should have done and hadn't, all the things she should have said, and all the things she should and shouldn't have done and had. The hope of a future with Brian almost had her rising, but there was too much water under one bridge, or water over the dam. She'd been disappointed too many times by too many men. Some people were lovable and some were not. She was just one of those people who, page 6, wasn't destined to find a man who could love her. She was no longer believed in the myth of a happily ever after, quote-unquote. Her life was liable to end altogether, more gruesome way. "You should jump," she said, turning back to search through the black, thick smoke from the grassy clearing. She knew there had to be somewhere else. A moment later, she felt a strong hand grip her arm, yanking her out of her seat. "I am not, by God, going to take that blame for leaving you behind, you stubborn brat." The plane shimmied again, and the wings tipped sideways. "Let me go." She reached back in an attempt to right the plane, but he pulled her inexorably towards the door, which she was starting to tilt upward at an angle that might keep them both and let them escape. Taylor jerked free, her heart thundering in her chest, and grabbed the control column, bringing the plane back to level. Panting breathlessly, her eyes locked with Brian's. "Just go. Someone has to keep the plane steady so you can get out the door." "I'm not going anywhere without you, Tag. Get that into your head, so you can either join me in getting out of this plane or we both go down in flames." Page 27. "Yeah, well, crap. I made a jury-rigged tandem jump with you into a pea-sized meadow surrounded by fire, and it didn't get either one of us killed. A grizzly attacked me, and I walked away unscathed. A tree nearly crushed me flat, but here I am. I think I'm entitled." She felt him quiver as he pressed his face against her neck. "It's just adrenaline," he muttered. His whole body was shaking uncontrollably. Too much adrenaline. And that's why I was like going, okay, can you honestly see a plane crashing, them jumping out, only to get attacked by a grizzly, then a tree falls, almost hits him. See why I was like going, okay, now this sounds like an Indiana Jones movie. So at first it was not drawing me in. But it did. Otherwise there wouldn't be so many paper clips. Page 41. She'd seen the announcement of his wedding in the local paper, and another article when he divorced 5 years later. He'd been single for an entire year, but Taylor had resisted getting in touch with him outside of work. They did it together, fighting fires, her flying, him jumping. She heard the high school romances stuck with you for a long time. All she knew was that she never felt this way for another man. what she felt in those few months she spent with Brian Flynn in high school. Taylor had thought about it a lot and couldn't quite put a finger on it, but what she found in Brian's arms was peace, joy, which was strange words to use for a high school fling. She never really sat down to figure it out. She just knew how she felt when she was with Brian. Valued, cherished. Her feelings for Brian had been powerful as they were confusing. Respect, adoration, and something else, something she never named. She made a point not to say "I love you," quote unquote, since she supposedly only dated him with the intention of breaking up with him. Fear had kept her from getting in touch with him over the past year. Fear that he would laugh at the very idea. Fear that he would reject her. Fear that she imagined. Page 42. All those feelings she felt in high school, feelings she was unable to recreate with any man since. Taylor felt Brian's hand on her shoulder and bit back a surprised gasp. "I didn't mean to startle you. You were just taking too long. I wanted to make sure you're okay." Page 47. They dated long enough in high school for Brian to discover that Tag had a lot of hang-ups about a lot of stuff, not least of which was the fact that she had no mother and mostly an absent father. Her father had stayed away in Cheyenne for 8 years, serving 2 terms as a Wyoming governor, and sent Tag to a boarding school in Switzerland for middle school. Brian wasn't sure why he'd taken the chance of hooking up with Greyhawk, even someone as enticing as Tag, when their fathers were constantly looking for ways to cut each other's throats. But he'd been at any age when he rebelled against just about everything, and dating Tag, page 48, had become more than one way to defy his father and irk his 3 brothers. He quickly discovered that he and that Greyhawk girl had a lot in common. He had no mother either. She died birthing his youngest brother, Devon, and his father was absent even though he never left home, and it made sense. Angus Flynn ruled the roost from his study, where he manipulated everyone and everything around him from sunrise into late at night. Maybe the feud between their fathers was so bitter because a long time ago Angus Flynn and King Greyhawk had been the best of friends. In fact, Angus' sister Jane had been King's first wife. Unfortunately, after King divorced Aunt Jane, she retreated to the Flynn family ranch, gotten hooked on barbiturates, and died of an overdose. Brian would never forget that anguished cry that had echoed through the house when Angus discovered his sister's dead body. His father blamed King for Aunt Jane's death and had been exacting revenge in large ways and small ever since. Brian wondered how his relationship with Tag might have turned out if Aiden hadn't caught them naked together after the junior prom. Although Aiden's appearance had interrupted their lovemaking, horribly embarrassing the two of them, his older brother hadn't confronted Brian immediately. He merely walked away, not saying a word, until Brian came home that night. Then he let him have it. "One of the King's brats," he ranted. "Are you crazy, Brian, or are you just plain stupid? I like her. She's just using you." Page 49. Okay, we move forward. Page 64 and 65. "I guess I'm finally going to lose that extra 5 pounds I put on since March." "March, huh? The 5 pounds have anything to do with your half-brother Matt showing up out of the blue and taking over your dad's ranch?" "Everything to do with it," Taylor muttered. "I heard about the raw deal you Greyhawk girls got. It's hard to believe King gave the ranch to a black sheep who hid himself away in Australia for 20 years and left you 4 girls out in the cold. Kingdom Come won't belong to Matt until he's lived there for 368 consecutive days. If we 4 girls have anything to say about it, he won't last that long. Devon told me that you let King's Tennessee Walker stallion into the pasture with Matt's quarter horse brooding mares. That was inspired deviltry. He must have been furious. We were paying him back for forcing Eve to move to her wild mustangs off the pasture so he could put his mares there instead. Reminds me of all the tricks you Greyhawk girls pulled on us Flynn boys over the years. We aren't called King's brats for nothing." Taylor heard the tremor in her own voice. Merely talking wasn't getting the job done. She was scared witless. "Brian? Would you please hold me?" Okay, we're moving on. Page 77. Taylor wanted to be in a loving relationship. She wanted to be married and have children, but she was short on trust. She never had been sure of any of her fiancés, that they'd hang around through thick and thin. She wouldn't shake the thought that men who'd sworn to love her would run away at the first sign of trouble, the way her mother had, or abandon her without a backward look to follow their own personal dreams, as her father had. Her parents' behavior had left Taylor feeling like a person without a lot of worth to anybody. Was it any wonder she expected a man to take off when the going got tough? Consequently, she always made sure she found a reason to leave first. She couldn't face the thought of being abandoned yet again by someone she loved, because Taylor was always ready and willing to walk away. She'd been careful never to let her feelings get too engaged. Okay, page 87. If it was Brian who talked him into the bet. Now, we're going to change gears here. They talk about two couples in this book. There's Taylor and Brian, okay? And there's so many sisters and so many brothers, right? It's hard to keep, everybody together. The next is, Aiden and Leah. So, here's their relationship on page 87. It was Brian who talked him into the bet when he told his brother to stop moping over his broken marriage and move on with his life. Brian had countered that Aiden hadn't even managed to get a woman to fall in love with him, let alone marry him. He was in no position to lecture Brian on his love life. Aiden remembered bragging, "I can get any woman I want." "Any woman?" Brian countered. "How about Leah Greyhawk?" "Who'd want her? That female's nothing but piss and vinegar. In fact, Leah could be downright vicious when it came to defending her sisters against Flynn pranks. Aiden had the scars to prove it." Page 88. In retaliation for Connor's cutting Eve cinch before the barrel racing competition at the junior radio, causing Leah's younger sister to break her arm when the saddle came free, Leah had cut the cinch on Aiden's saddle before his cattle roping competition at the same event. He ended up breaking his leg, and it still ached on cold days. "You said any woman," Brian jibbed. Aiden eyed his brother sideways. What was Brian's game? He had rubbed his thigh and said, "Not Leah." Brian made clucking sounds. "You're afraid to be because you know you'll fail. Leah isn't likely to fall for your tricks. She knows too much about your exploits with women." Leah was the same age he was. They'd been in most of the same classes in high school. They hadn't had much to do with each other, but Jackson Hole was a small place, and he was sure she'd heard whatever gossip there was about him. "I could have her swooning at my feet." He snapped his fingers. "Like that." Even as he said it, Aiden realized how silly the whole conversation had become. At 33, he didn't need to prove his prowess with women. He had plenty of willing partners over the years. Getting involved with one of the king's brats was a dumb move. "I have no doubt you could charm Leah into a date or two," Brian said, "but could you get her to fall in love with you?" "That's ridiculous." Brian bent his elbows and flapped his arms like I said, cluck, 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 cluck. "You think it's that easy to get a woman to trust you enough to give you her love? Put your money where your mouth is. I'll bet you my Harley that you can't get Leah Greyhawk to fall in love with you." This is page 89. Aiden had been coveting Brian's Harley Davidson ever since his brother had bought it. He could have bought a motorcycle of his own, but that would have felt like too much of the copying Brian. As the firstborn, he had always been, and always would be, the leader in the family. "I have to admit I'm tempted," he told Brian, "but that's a fine ride." "If you lose," Brian said, "you never say another word about me getting on with my life." Brian then extended his hand. "Do we have a bet?" It seemed harmless enough at the time. All Aiden had to do was put his best foot forward with Leah. He'd never seen her date, even in high school. He supposed she stayed home to keep an eye on her sisters. She wasn't as pretty as one of the twins or Eve, but she hadn't been bad looking either. She had beautiful golden brown eyes that reflected what she was feeling. At least he would give her that much of a head start, figuring out what was going to be going on inside her. He liked a challenge, and he sure liked Leah, and she would give him a run for his money. He put his hand in Brian and said, "You're on." Even making contact with Leah hadn't been easy. Both of them worked on their father's ranches, the Flynn Ranch, the Lucky Seven, and the Greyhawk Ranch. Kingdom Come had a few common borders, but the ranch houses sat in the middle of the 1,000 acres of the land, unless he and Leah happened to be in Jackson Hole. Page 90. At the same time shopping for supplies, or showed up at the same time cattle auction rodeos, there were no reason for their paths to cross. When he finally tracked her down at the hardware store in town, Leah had been suspicious of his motives, rightfully as it turned out. that it took all his persuasion and a small lie to get her to go out with him. I was wondering if you could help me with a problem I'm having." Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What sort of problem?" "Well, there was no problem, so we made one up. It's about this girl I'm dating. She broke up with me, and I can't figure out why." Her lip curled cynically. "She must be blind or stupid." He had been shocked by her response, which suggested that she liked his looks and maybe even him as a person. He shot her a coaxing smile and said, "Obviously she's not as perceptive as you." Leah snorted derisively. It was the sound of a cowhound might make to another cowhound. There was nothing feminine about it. It dismissed the possibility that she thought he was anyone worth knowing. He appreciated the fact that she hadn't gone all girly on him and said, "I hope that you'd be willing to hear me out about the relationship, I mean, and let me know what you think, and that I should have done differently." Her gaze lowered to her feet, remained there for a few moments. He almost rocked backward when her eyes finally looked at his. Those fierce sunlight orbs, which reminded him of a lioness on the hunt, challenged him to the truth. He suddenly felt guilty for the hoax and he was perpetuating on her. He almost ended the bet right there, except there was something else in her eyes. It was a feeling that he could see inside him to see what he was thinking, what he was feeling. The experience was strange enough to keep him silent. "Why don't you ask your brothers for advice? They're no help with something like this. I need a female perspective. I haven't dated much, but I have 3 sisters with a lot of experience. Maybe you should speak to one of them." This is page 91, by the way. He was surprised to hear her admit that she hadn't dated, even though he knew it was to be true, even though he was more surprised that she offered to be set up with one of her sisters. "I have a suggestion. I don't know if you'll go for it or not, but here it is. Go on a date with me. You can judge for yourself where you think I might have gone wrong." "Why me?" "I can count on you to tell me the brutal truth." Her lips pursed and then flattened. "All right, I'll go on a pretend date with you." Leah had been a babe in the woods, falling for a line he handed her. To this day, Aiden was ashamed of his underhanded tactics in getting her out on the first date, but he wasn't sorry he'd done it. Otherwise, he would have deprived himself of everything good that had followed. Page 92. Leah had greeted him with wary eyes, Stagecoach Bar in Wilson, where they arranged to meet for their pretend date, and watched him with a mistrust of the rest of the night. The bar was on the outside of Jackson. I'm getting tongue-tied. We're probably going to stop pretty soon, but anyway, we'll continue on. The bar was just on the outside of Jackson, which had been around since the 1940s, catered to local workers, so they were less likely to run into someone they knew. The music was so loud, talking was difficult. By the end of the evening, Aiden was ready to forget the whole thing, but he knew Brian would never let him hear the end of it. He walked Leah through the parking lot to her pickup, then put a hand on her elbow to turn face him. "Well, what do you think? If this was a real date, would you go out with me again?" "No." What I like there is her honesty with him. And she's letting her guard down, being honest, and just telling it like it is. And I think everyone should do that on a first date. Tell it like it is. Don't be scared to share your life with that person because you want that person to be a part of your life. Even though Aiden had no intentions of going on another date with Leah, her rejection stung. "Why not?" "You couldn't have had a good time with me tonight. We only danced the 2-step twice. You passed on every waltz. When you could have used the opportunity to hold me in your arms, you drank 1 beer. I don't know if you just don't like beer or whether you were afraid I'd take advantage of you if you got drunk." He laughed absurdly at her suggestions. She held a hand up to keep him from explaining or making excuses and continued, "You didn't ask me for anything about myself, nor did you have any information about yourself that would lead me to believe you were interested in the 2 of us getting to know each other better." He found her scathingly honest, refreshing enough to meet it with an equal frankness. "Everything you said is true enough, but I think there's something about this." He gestured toward between the 2 of them. "That's worth exploring." It dawned on him that he meant it. There was something about her that he found intriguing, but he knew a little bit more about her now than he had before that evening had begun. So do you want to give it another try? Let's see how far. You were going all the way to page 94. She took a long time considering his suggestion. Instead of speaking, she rose on a tiptoe and slid one arm around his neck, teasing her fingertip through the 2 long hair of his neck, raising goose flesh. Then she pressed her lips softly against his, with her tongue dipping inside the mouth for a thrill instant, spinning his insides as though he were on a tilt-a-whirl. When she was done, Leah looked into his eyes and whispered, "Yes, this is worth exploring." He felt as though he'd been poleaxed. He was dizzy, his heart was pounding like it wanted out of his chest. Nothing even remotely like this ever happened to him. Aiden fought that confusing feeling because they frightened him. For a moment, he considered changing his mind. Then he realized if he did, he'd have to give Brian a reason for giving up. Flynn's never quit, which meant he had to see Leah again. He would be more just careful next time. He would make sure that he was the one in charge of the kissing if they did. And he would find out everything about her. Once she was no longer a mystery to him, he would be able to walk away without a qualm. He should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing was ever easy between Greyhawks and Flynn's, considering the way their relationship had started out. It was doomed from the start. Aiden should have never expected or hoped for anything else. Okay. Moving on to page 126, 127, and 128. On 126, when she didn't speak, he said, "Oh, I see. You didn't love any of them. That was the case. Why get engaged?" In a small voice in her head said, "I think there's something wrong with me." "What are you talking about?" "I want to be in love. I just don't trust a man to keep on loving me. I figure he's going to get tired of me eventually, so I run before he can." "Get tired of you? Are you crazy?" "Admit it, Brian. If I hadn't walked away from you in high school, that you would have left me eventually. I like you, Tag, a lot." She noticed his use of light. Even though he qualified it with a lot, that was a far cry from love that he supposedly felt and verbalized and expressed. "I was willing to defy Aiden to keep dating you in high school. He thought you were going to hurt me if I stuck around. Turned out he was right." "You were hurt when we broke up?" She felt him nod. "I hadn't nearly had my fill of you. Be honest. How much longer would we have lasted as a couple?" "I guess we'll never know." "You sound mad." "You didn't just walk away, Tag. You ran us like a scared rabbit. You never gave us a chance. Now I see why with you it's don't get too close, don't love too much, or I'm out of here." "I guess I was lucky you left me when you did. I'm sorry if I hurt you, Brian. I did care for you. Too much, maybe." "Why didn't you say something at the time?" She put a palm out to his bristly cheek. "I guess I was afraid." "Of what?" "That if I stayed, the pain of losing you would be devastating." She put a hand to his lips to keep him from interrupting. "When I thought the plane was going to crash, that I might die, the thing that I regretted most in this life was walking, all right, running, away from you in high school. I thought that what I might say to you if I got a second chance." He eased her hand away from his lips and took it in his own. "What would that be?" I wish we could try again, that there was a spark of something between us. I think can be rekindled." She still felt his body stiffen. "You have feelings for me now? Still?" This is page 127. Leftover feelings, unfinished feelings, wonder if we could ever recapture what we had feelings. He eased her head off his shoulder onto his t-shirt she was using as a pillow and sat up. "I don't want to hear this, not now, not when it's too late." His words confirmed their fate, the impending doom that had loosened her tongue. Their lives would end in this cave. She understood Brian's frustration. Why, consider page 128. What might have happened between them when there was simply no happily ever after to be had. I'm going to leave you with that. That is part 1 of this book review, because I've got a workout to get in. We'll start at the next paperclip tomorrow night. And it might be a short book review, might be a long book review. I'm thinking it's going to be a 4-part book review because it's that good. I got this book, before you ask, at the Dollar General for $3. And I wish they would have more Western romances, just saying, at the Dollar General. This one has proved to be much better than what I thought. And I think it helps. I always say it's better to be a hopeless romantic that lives inside a book than a hopeless romantic who lives in the real world and is always hurt or let down or heartbroken. Anyway, this book is an amazing read, and I can't wait to share more with you tomorrow night. I've got a workout to go do. Love y'all. See you tomorrow for part 2 of this amazing book review.